Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I am giddy with excitement because I have a special guest, very special guest today, the fabulous, the one and only executive career coach, Karen Senteio is joining us. And what I know about Karen is that she's going to be dropping a lot of gems, a lot of good book resources in this episode. So be sure to get a notepad. You will want to do that and apply these tips to your career. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you for bringing me on. I'm excited, and I feel blessed to be on this podcast with you. I'm excited about having this conversation with you.
Me too. So let's get right to it. So when you were growing up, what did you want to be?
Oh my God. I wanted to be everything. Like a typical Enneagram 7, I'm eclectic, and I'm always in search of that jolt. So at one point, I wanted to be a fashion designer.
Ooh.
I wanted to be an interior designer and also a writer. But I think that through line is creativity. I love the creative spark. So I've always wanted to do something along that line. And I ended up doing something totally different.
God, it always happens that way.
Isn't that always the way? But at the core, I think I'm a change agent. But I took quite a path to get there.
Okay.
I spent almost 30 years in corporate America and in various roles, individual contributor and also in leadership roles. But the through line was professional development. I always loved the part of developing people and taking them from where they are to, where they want to be. But I was following calls to reach what I now call my calling. My executive coaching and consulting is a calling, a little bit of a change agent. So I help people map their way to their best life as they define it. But I took quite a path to get there.
So tell us about that path. And this show is about being in the driver's seat. So when did you realize that you were in the driver's seat, very hands-on and intentional about your career trajectory?
It took a while. I think when I was in the corporate arena, I was on the business side of the house, but it wasn't fulfilling all the things that I needed. I needed to do something a little bit more creative and something a little different than what I was doing. So I decided after maybe 15 years in the business side of the house to go to IT.
Yeah. Wow,
And
we have that in common.
oh yeah, and I never really knew anything about IT. I didn't even know back then we didn't have computers like we have right now. I don't even know we had the internet back.
Uh-oh.
But when I decided I wanted to make that move, it was surprising to the folks that I was working with. I got a lot of pushback about going to IT. Why do you want to go there? What would make you make this change? Because we're thinking that this is your career trajectory. But I then decided, no, I think this is what I'm going to do. I was scared. I was scared to do it because it was a totally different department, but it felt right. And I think that was really the first time I said, I'm in the driver's seat and I'm going to make this decision, even though other folks are saying that it's not the thing to do. I think the calling was pulling me to do something completely different. So I think that was the first time I was really in the driver's seat.
And so when you were in the passenger seat, you know, what was happening? And tell us a little bit about what was happening when you were in the passenger seat in your career.
So in the passenger seat, I was just, I wouldn't say it was obeying commands. I was just following a career trajectory that was successful, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel fulfilling.
Mm.
And I knew then I had to own what I wanted to do and to go forward. I wanted to reclaim my power. Um, and I did that, but sitting in the passenger seat was like watching someone else's life.
Mm.
And I
That
needed
is
to do, and I
powerful.
needed, yeah, I needed to make that change, and I'm so glad I did.
Oh, that is so powerful. I told you, audience, that there would be gems. Watching someone else's life. Yeah, absolutely. And I so can relate about somebody having a defined path, because organizations have succession planning and they put people in boxes, or manager conversations, talent conversations, where they see you. And so it's up to you, wanting to be in the driver's seat, to interject and be in alignment with what's laid out, or say, nope, I want something different, and advocate for yourself. So I love what you're saying about being scared but moving ahead despite the fear.
And absolutely, and I did appreciate that experience that I was having in that role, because it gave me the discipline,
Mm-hmm.
gave me some foresight into thinking more strategically about what I wanted to do. So I appreciated the time that I was in that role, even though I wasn't in the driver's seat. But when I got in that driver's seat, it was like it was like changing gears.
Yeah, yeah.
It was changing gears.
If you wrote a book and you think through your 30-year career body of work inside an organization, and then also now as a career coach, an executive coach, and a consultant, what would you call the book title? What do you think? Well, what's the lessons? What's the summation of this career experience, and the summation in the form of a book title?
Oh my God, what a great question. I think I would call it Vujade.
Ooh.
Vujade. So deja vu is, I've done this before, I've had this experience, and Vujade is something different. Is how do you see the same thing with fresh eyes?
Mm.
So I think I would call it Vujade, because I'm looking at what I've seen before, but now I see possibility, I see hope. I can see it in a different perspective. So yeah, I would call it Vujade.
I love that. Give us an example of something that you're seeing with fresh eyes.
Oh, what am I saying? What, that happens every single day. I think I wake up every single day and say, how can I see this experience with fresh eyes? How can I see this moment with
Mm.
fresh eyes? How can I see my client and their experience with fresh eyes?
Mm.
I think dropping into curiosity is Vujade.
Mhm, mhm,
And I think putting in time to pause and really look around is Vujade.
mm, mm.
And I think I've allowed that in my life, and I think to the betterment of my life, I believe.
I love that. What a great opportunity for us as coaches to be able to apply some vujade. I love that. Anytime I hear that word, I love it. So tell us, what is your formula for successfully owning your career? What are the key ingredients?
So it's interesting. So I don't think of it so much as a formula, but I like what you said about key ingredients. I think it's a willingness to own your decision and the outcome.
Mm,
And I think that's what matters most, whatever the outcomes may be. I think it's a combination of curiosity, informed risk taking, and not willy nilly risk
mm,
taking, informed, agility, absolutely agility, and getting comfortable with the possibility of falling along the way as part of the experience.
mm. Get comfortable with falling. Falling,
Oh,
you
yeah,
said?
absolutely falling, in failing, in
Mhm.
failing.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think risk taking has to be part of the journey,
Mhm.
but I don't think risk taking wasn't always part of something
Yeah.
that I did. And I had to learn that along the way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So tell me about, or tell us about the word informed risk taking. What does one need to be informed about to have an appreciation for risk taking?
I think you have to do the work. I think, as I said, an Enneagram 7, Enneagram 7s, we love shiny baubles. We love the excitement, we love the jolt, and sometimes we can just move
Mhm.
without thinking. And sometimes that works out, and most times it doesn't. So when I say informed risk taking, I'm saying do the work, do the research
Mhm.
before you take the steps. Research a new career path. Research, really ask yourself, is this something that I really want to do? Um,
Mhm.
so I think it's more informed is just doing the work and doing the analysis on your next steps.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I appreciate that. I'm sure your coachees appreciate that as well. Talk to us about agility. What do you
So
mean when you talk about agility?
I think agility is one of the most important skills anyone can have. And I think it's from my project management background. Because in project management, when we're working on projects, there's a concept called waterfall. You started at the very beginning and you run like the Dickens to the end.
Yep.
And the most important thing is meeting the deadline on time, on budget,
Yep.
and all that. So there wasn't always that iterative process of falling and learning and getting back up, falling and learning, getting back up. It was pell mell to the end. With agile project management, you build in the opportunities to learn.
Mhm.
So you experiment along the way with little pieces of new ideas or little pieces of what the end product could look like. So it allows you to make the adjustments along the way. And I think that's important, because at the end, you'll have a better product. I think you'll have a better you by building in some agility
Mhm.
into the process. And agility allows, for failure
Mm.
as part of the ride. And I'm not saying, when people hear the word failure, go, "Ooh, I don't do that. I don't do
Yep.
failure." But failure allows you to tweak it, fix it, and go back again with a newer, fresher approach.
Mhm.
So I think that's critical. That's what I do mean by agility.
Oh, I love that. And I can relate. And I want to say former project manager as well, but I feel like
You're
when you
always a
have,
project manager.
yeah, exactly. When you have the skill set, everything you do, there's a form of a project in there. And I have
Absolutely.
done an agile and a waterfall and more waterfall than agile, but I get the concept. The book, The 12-Week Year, popped into my head when you were talking because it's the concept of not setting goals for the year, but in a 12-week format and I think I even have it here, The 12-Week Year by Brian Moran. This one, I don't know if you've seen this, Karen.
Oh no, see, you're making me write down another book. Oh my God.
Well, I'm going to ask you to share some of the books that are gems that our listeners should uh, add to their library. But this is Get More Done in 12 Weeks Than Others Do in 12 Months. And when you were talking about the agile, the shorter, the iterative, it reminded me of that book because what a great opportunity to think of goals in your career in smaller chunks and iterate on achieving them, and then go, as opposed to the life cycle potentially of an organization performance annual review. You can iterate in smaller chunks to get to the finish line.
Oh yeah. And I think, that iterative process, I think, is completely necessary because as you're building who you are and building your brand doesn't just happen
Mm,
overnight. It's an iterative process. I remember when I first started out in my coaching practice, I had so many different business cards. I can't even tell
Yep.
you how many business cards I had. Maybe even 4 or 5 in 1 month,
Wow.
because I was trying to figure out who I was going to be.
Yep.
And what that was really was an iterative process of cutting off what you don't need anymore and
Yep.
picking up what works for you or what serves you. So that is the iterative process of it. Agile, agile development.
I love that, and I can relate to that because I used to have a lot of business cards too, and I was once a life coach, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to be a life coach. Cut that off," you know. And I had a photography business, so I had business cards: Simone Morris Photography, Simone Morris Coaching, then Simone Morris Enterprise. So it is that allowance to iterate to get to your future self or where you want to be, where you feel like, I've landed, this feels good, this shirt feels good, let me keep wearing it because I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think things have changed so much. We used to say, "What are you going to be in 5 years?" And
Mm,
I don't say that anymore because I think the process is so much shorter.
mm,
And Harvard Business Review has done tons of articles on change and what does it take to be a leader now. And I think how we look at careers has changed.
mm,
Tom Peters I think it was in his article, A Brand Called You, talked about careers are not ladders anymore.
mm, mm.
They go up, they go down, they go
Yep.
sideways. So you're picking up these skills and abilities along the way, and it's just not in a trajectory like it used to be.
Yep.
I think it's far more exciting and far more dynamic than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love what you're saying. And so you brought up the Harvard Business Review, and I'd love for you to go into your library or into your toolkit and tell us what resources have been helpful to you in navigating your career.
So definitely A Brand Called You, that article from Tom Peters. It's over 20 years old, but it's one of Harvard Business Review's top 20 articles. They just did
Mm,
an article on their top 20 articles in the last 20 years. I believe it's something like that. And A
mm,
Brand Called You was one of those. And it talks about how do you look at yourself like a brand, like Coca-Cola
mm,
or Pepsi or any of those, Nike, and how to look at yourself from that perspective.
yep,
And I
yep,
never really thought about looking at myself as a brand. And he says, everything you do is a brand. How you show up in meetings, what you wear, how you speak, the roles you take, everything is a brand. And I thought that concept was really like mind blowing. And I read that article 20 years ago, and I still give it to clients because it's still relevant.
mm.
Uh,
I love that. I
yeah,
love
and
that.
and I think Think Again by Adam Grant.
Mm,
I love that book because it's almost goes back to Bujade, seeing things with fresh eyes. There's opportunities everywhere, and looking at what is happening around you and saying, what do I need to pay attention to in this moment, in this time, and how does it apply to me? So I think that
mm,
that book was pivotal. And Harvard Business Review in general, the publication, I've had a subscription for years, but I would say the last 2 years, Harvard Business Review is a must get. It's a must
mm,
read for anybody in a leadership role or career development, just development in general. They are knocking it out of the park with their articles. There's actually one I'm looking at right now, and it says and it's a special issue, how to lead now. What you
mm,
need to take charge amid financial uncertainty, technological transformation, and social change.
mm.
So every single article in that issue is fantastic and it will make you rethink what you're doing. And I think rethinking is a critical component of career development and
Mm.
not being married to anything.
What do you say to the people who say, these are great resources. I don't have time to, I don't have time because I'm so busy doing a lot of work. How do you find time to build to continue to develop and to read things like the Harvard Business Review, Adam Grant, Tom Peters, the resources that you're sharing?
Yeah, I completely understand busy because I've been there and still there. I'm
Mhm.
still there. I am exceptionally busy in running my own business, but I make me a priority.
Mm.
My calendar is filled with meetings, clients, just meetings in general, meeting fabulous people, meeting with my good friend Simone. Um, but I think I've decided to make myself a commitment. I'm a commitment.
Mm.
And I schedule time on my calendar for professional development. I have actual blocks of time on my calendar for professional development, and I guard it with the importance that I do everything else. Because if we're not developing ourselves and we're not putting that oxygen mask on ourselves,
Hmm.
what is work for?
Yep.
I don't want to work. I want to be inspired.
Ooh,
And that changes how I look at things when I'm making a commitment to myself.
I love that. I want to be inspired, not work. I love that.
Absolutely.
I want to inspire others.
Yeah.
It's always so great to chat with you, Karen. Are there any parting words that you'd like to share with our audience?
There is a parting word I do want to share with the audience. And I wanted to share Carolyn Wonga. She's the CEO of Essence Magazine.
Whew,
Love her. She's
powerhouse.
fabulous. Everything about her is unique, powerful energy. And I saw a little snippet on LinkedIn where she was being interviewed, and she mentioned 3 things you must do. And I had it pinned to the top of my LinkedIn for forever. And I think I just recently removed it, but the 3 things she said you must do really sat well with me. And she said, pursue your purpose, find it. It's your obligation to the world that no one else can do. The second thing, authenticity. Operate as who you are. If you cannot operate as who you are, change where you are. And that could be mental, physical,
Mhm.
life, etc. Do not compromise on who you are because it's too hard to get it back. And the
Mm.
last thing, which resonates with me, change your relationship with failure. Give yourself a daily threshold of 5 fails a day. And it's not a bad day until you can reach 6. And
Mm.
so what's important is failure recovery and resiliency. I thought that those gems were just sparkling. And I think that's important advice, and it's some good advice. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I've seen that, and I want to implement especially step number 3,
Oh,
uh,
great.
because reframing failure, that the transformative growth, there's so much there if you're able to reframe it and action what she's saying about failure. I love that. I think it can apply to your career, the relationships that you build, and even internally in corporate, but also as an entrepreneur, the relationship that you build, the collaborations to get different outcomes in your business. That is a great way to wrap up. I was going to ask you, who do you admire from a career standpoint and why? But you mentioned Carolyn Wanga, and she's a good one.
Oh yeah, she's a good one. And I love everything that she said. And I think I'm gonna go back and repin it because talking about it again made me think about the impact that it had on me when I read it.
Yeah. She wears a bold authenticity flag, and so does Bazoma St. John, comes to mind as well as another person who is, I am authentically me. You're not
Oh, yeah.
going to change me. Get on board. And so I love to see that, because we need to notice people who are leading the way from an authenticity standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she's definitely, Carolyn Wanga is definitely an authentic person that
Yep.
someone to follow, someone to
Yep.
follow.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Karen, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Can you please tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to do so?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Find me there. I'd be more than happy to engage with you. And you'll see all the things that I post, and hopefully you'll like what you see, and we can stay connected and have a really good relationship.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, again, thank you for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your
My
Career
pleasure.
podcast.
My pleasure, always.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.